Chapter 19. Concerning Ragnar's men. The news travelled through many lands that a king had 2 sons. This king became ill and he died, and his sons wanted to drink to their inheritance from him. They planned a feast in 3 years' time and invited everyone to come who heard about it in the next 3 years. Over these 3 years they prepared a feast. And when the summer came when the feast was to be held and the appointed time arrived, there was such a huge crowd that no one could guess how many guests there were, and many large halls were prepared and many tents besides. When most of the first evening had passed, a man came to one of these halls. He was so big that no one else there was as large, and from the clothing he wore, anyone could tell that he had been in the company of noble men. When he came into the hall, he went before the brothers and greeted them, and asked them where they would let him sit. They liked the look of him and asked him to sit at the highest bench. He took up as much space as 2 men. When he had sat down, drinks were brought to him as there were to other men. But there was no drinking horn so large that he could not drink it dry in one gulp. Everyone thought this man seemed unimpressed by all the other men there. But then it happened that a second man came to the feast. He was even larger than the first. Both these men wore long-brimmed hats, and when the second man came before the throne of the young kings, he greeted them elegantly and asked them where they would let him sit. They said that this man ought to sit closer to them on the highest bench. He went to his seat, and together with the other stranger who had come in, he displaced 5 men. And this second stranger was even more of a drinking man than the first. He drank so fast that he simply seemed to pour each horn's contents down his throat, though no one thought he seemed drunk. He was not friendly to the men sitting near him, and he showed his back to them. The first man who had come in said that they should have some fun together, and he said, "I'll go first." He gestured as the other man with his hand and spoke this poem. "Tell us about your heroism. I ask you, where did you see the blood-drunk raven calling from a branch? I think you've more often accepted drinks at other feasts than laid out bodies on the plain and set a table for the ravens." The other man felt offended by such slander, and he composed this poem in reply. "Shut up, you dumb stay-at-home. They call you a lazy little man. You've never done anything that I couldn't do better. I never saw you in battle, not even in sunshine. You've never killed for the wolves. Your only business is drinking." The first man answered in this way. "We let our ships sail the waves of the great sea, and we made bloody wounds in men with shining armour. The she-wolf howled, and the eagle felt his hunger satisfied on a man's neck. We took gold and drew blood." And now the second man spoke. "I never saw any of you when we sailed the open sea for miles on a white-sailed ocean-going ship, and when, at the sound of the trumpets, we launched setting sail, and before our blood-red prow we gave rich gifts to the raven." Then the first man said this. "It's not fitting for us 2 to argue at this feast about what each of us did better than the other. You stood where waves crashed against a ship at sea, and I sat where the sail-yard turned the red ship to harbour." Then the second man said, "We both followed Björn, and sometimes Ragnar, into every battle. Men were tested hard. I was there for the battle that broke out in Bulgaria. I was injured there in my side. Sit closer in, comrade." And now the 2 men recognised each other again, and they remained at the feast.